Doctor?
What is it?
That blip we're picking up might only be a radioactive particle. The Proteus may already be destroyed.
On this episode of Old Joe's Reminiscence, when a medical team is reduced to microscopic size and injected into a man's bloodstream, who knows what dangers they may encounter? Fantastic Voyage is a 1966 science fiction adventure from a story idea by director Otto Clement along with Jerome Bixby, who's probably best known for his 4 Star Trek scripts: Mirror Mirror, Day of the Dove, Requiem for Methuselah, and By Any Other Name. In the story, doctors in a miniaturized submarine travel through a patient's bloodstream to repair a blood clot in his brain. Harry Kleiner wrote the final revised screenplay. It's a motion picture that includes cutting-edge special effects for 1966. 20th Century Fox announced it as the most expensive science fiction film ever made. The film's budget was $5.1 million. Have you seen it? If not, find a way to take a look before I go any further, because I'm going to do my microscopic examination next. Fantastic Voyage came out when I was 7 years old. That year, my mom and dad took me and my 2-year-old sister to see Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree. Oh, bother. So, I would have to wait a few years to catch this gem when it aired on television. It's always been somewhat difficult to find this film. A friend tried capturing it on VHS tape from a satellite feed at work back in the 1980s. We were very disappointed to find out that he'd somehow recorded it without sound. Still, I've seen it a few times since then. It's still tough to locate today, so I'm reviewing an old VHS tape recording that I made from cable TV back in 1988. I'm recording from the TV screen because I can't seem to locate my video capture card. I'll admit that as many times as I've seen it, I couldn't have named any of the actors in this movie other than the lovely Raquel Welch. It's been years though, so let's dive right in. The film opens with a TWA airliner coming in for a landing. Some military types are waiting there for it. A line of 3 black sedans rushes in with motorcycle escorts as troops surround the Boeing 707. A man in a trench coat emerges. He's followed by Jan Bennis, a nervous old man played by Jean Delvan. He's been portraying minor film characters since the year 1917. Bennis shakes hands with the man before entering the back seat of the middle car in the lineup. In a well-planned-out ambush, another big sedan T-bones one of those motorcycles and the middle Chrysler Imperial, disabling it. Bennis is quickly moved to one of the backup cars. He was exposed for some time, providing a perfect shot for an assassin. But once he's seated in the new car, we hear a gunshot and a bullet goes through the glass, hitting the man. Why they waited to shoot then is beyond me. The car speeds away as several agents stay behind to return fire. Next, we see Bennis on a hospital bed, and the opening credits start. There's no opening score, just some sound effects. In fact, I think they must have used every sci-fi sound effect in their entire library while making this film. After the credits are done, we're in a city scene with another Chrysler Imperial. One of the men in the back seat is a Mr. Grant. Grant is played by our lead actor, Stephen Boyd.
Stephen Boyd was born William Miller in Northern Ireland on July 4, 1931.
He worked in an insurance office and travel agency by day and spent nights and weekends acting. The stage name he chose, Boyd, was his mother's maiden name. He was a leading man at the Ulster Theatre Group before heading to better exposure in England. While in England, he nearly died during a flu epidemic. He performed in plays on BBC television. He was signed to 20th Century Fox in 1956 and quickly gained popularity. He won a Golden Globe Award for his role as Messala in the 1959 epic Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston. Brigitte Bardot chose Boyd as her leading man in several films, leading to rumors of an affair. Boyd was the first choice to play James Bond in the 1962 film Dr. No. He was originally cast as Mark Antony in the 1963 film Cleopatra, but delays prompted him to abandon. His popularity began to diminish in the 1970s, but he still kept busy with TV appearances. It was after a guest shot on Hawaii Five-0 that Stephen suffered a heart attack while playing golf. Stephen Boyd died on June 2, 1977.
Grant wants to know what's going on and where they're going. The man with Grant says he can't tell him that. When the car comes to a stop, the three agents get out. Grant is told to stay. Now, rather than lowering the car on a commercial elevator, they show off with what I consider to be a poorly executed visual effect. The car is supposed to be lowered into the ground. It had me thinking that Grant and the car were being miniaturized at that point. It's an unnecessary shot. Grant is met by an MP on a golf cart. The MP is played by Brendan Boone in his only major motion picture appearance. He would frequently play characters on TV. They're driving around the ramps and concourses of the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena. Film director Richard Fleischer would return to this arena when filming Soylent Green. They sure had to rent a lot of golf carts to film these scenes. The MP signals a left turn and pulls into an office. Grant recognizes General Carter, who's being played by Edmund OBrien.
Edmund OBrien was born to Irish parents in Brooklyn on September 10, 1915. Harry Houdini was his neighbor, who taught him magic tricks to perform for other children. He became interested in the theater and he began acting in school plays. He performed in summer stock and hit Broadway at the age of 21. He was performing with the likes of Burgess Meredith, Laurence Olivier, and Vivien Leigh. Edmund was offered a contract with RKO Pictures. Universal bought his contract so he could star in The Amazing Mrs. Holiday. Edmund joined the Army Air Force and performed on stage for the troops in World War II. After the war, O'Brien finished out his contract with Universal Studios. In 1948, he signed with Warner Brothers. After being released by Warner Brothers, O'Brien went freelance. One of his most famous films is the 1950 noir film DOA. He won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for his role in the 1954 film The Barefoot Contessa. He transitioned to TV in the late 1950s, but he still remained busy in film. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor again in 1964 for 7 Days in May. Edmund OBrien died on May 9, 1985 at the age of 69.
They enter an observation platform. The patient below has a blood clot in his brain. Grant wonders how he could be of any help. The general shows Grant a video monitor where they can see Dr. Duval and his female assistant. Then he addresses a second monitor on a two-way video feed. He introduces Grant to Dr. Michaels. Dr. Michaels is being played by actor Donald Pleasance, who I'll always remember as the forger in The Great Escape.
Donald Henry Pleasance was born in England on October 5, 1919. His whole family worked for the railway, and so did Donald until he hired on as an assistant stage manager in 1939. During World War II, Donald served as a wireless operator in 60 bombing raids over occupied Europe. On August 31, 1944, he was in a Lancaster bomber that was shot down over France during one such mission. He was captured and spent the remainder of the war in a German prisoner of war camp where he performed for his fellow captives. After the war, Donald resumed his stage acting career, as well as branching off into television and then film. Many will recognize him for his portrayal of the POW forger Colin Blythe, who's slowly going blind, in the 1963 film The Great Escape. Others may remember him as Dr. Sam Loomis in the Halloween franchise films. Donald Pleasance remained busy in hundreds of roles until his death at the age of 75 on February 2, 1995.
Dr. Michaels says they need Grant for security purposes. Since the attack on Bennis had failed to kill him, the enemy is likely to try again, perhaps by surgical assassination. The general suspects Dr. Duval, so Grant is to take orders from Dr. Michaels. The general commandeers the golf cart from that MP. As Grant's taking a seat on the cart, he asks the general about their logo. CMDF stands for Combined Miniature Deterrent Forces. As they're riding around the sports arena, I'm getting James Bond vibes from Stephen Boyd. General Carter provides the exposition narration. He says that they can shrink practically anything, adding that the other side, and I'm assuming they mean the Soviets, has the same capability. Both governments are hindered by the same problem. They can only keep things miniaturized for exactly 60 minutes. Bennis somehow knows the secret to controlling that, and the assassins are trying to stop him from sharing that secret. The general goes on to explain that he intends to shrink a submarine and its crew and inject them into Bennis's bloodstream. Once they're in the brain, they'll clear the blood clot. They enter a meeting room where Arthur O'Connell, who we recently saw in The Reluctant Astronaut, is portraying Colonel Donald Reed.
Arthur O'Connell was born in New York City on March 29, 1908. After the death of his father when Arthur was just 2 years old, he was sent to live with an aunt. He attended St. John's College for 2 years before finding work at New York Edison. He got his stage debut in a production of The Patsy in 1929. Arthur toured in New York and London. He got some small film roles in the late 1930s. He befriended Orson Welles, who cast Arthur as a reporter in Citizen Kane. Arthur was an entertainer in the Army during World War II and he went back to the stage after the war. In the 1950s, Arthur started getting more Hollywood roles and Oscar nominations. He continued acting until Alzheimer's disease forced his retirement in 1975. Arthur O'Connell died on May 18, 1981 at the age of 73.
He's complaining about the inclusion of a female assistant on the mission. Grant is then introduced to everyone present. Dr. Duval is played by Arthur Kennedy.
John Arthur Kennedy was born in Worcester, Massachusetts on February 17, 1914. Johnny studied drama at the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh. He moved to New York and John Kennedy made his Broadway debut in 1938. That same year he married Mary Sheffray and the two headed for Los Angeles. James Cagney discovered Kennedy and cast him as his brother in City for Conquest. He was signed to a contract at Warner Brothers, which brought him numerous film roles. Arthur Kennedy's long career includes scores of roles from his screen debut in 1940 until his death at the age of 75 on January 5, 1990.
Miss Cora Peterson, that female tech assistant, is played by Raquel Welch in her first starring role.
Raquel Welch was born in Chicago on September 5, 1940. She was the product of a Bolivian father and a mother who could trace her heritage to the Mayflower. Her parents moved to San Diego when Raquel was 2 years old. After years of ballet classes, she was told that she didn't have the body of a professional ballet dancer. At age 14, she was winning beauty pageants, but she wasn't all body and no brains. She graduated high school with honors. She attended college, performed on stage locally, and she was a TV weather presenter. Balancing her professional life with raising 2 children forced Raquel to drop her classes. She moved to Dallas to model for Neiman Marcus and she also worked as a cocktail waitress. She tried New York, but she decided that moving to Los Angeles would get her an acting career. She made a few appearances on TV and in movies using her married name, Welch. Fantastic Voyage was her first starring role in a major motion picture in 1966. Many will be more familiar with her other film from that year, 1,000,000 Years BC. Raquel continued acting until the year 2017. Raquel Welch died at the age of 82 on February 15, 2023.
Cora. Now there's a name you don't hear anymore. She doesn't look like a Cora to me. Next, Grant meets the sub's designer and pilot, Captain Bill Owens, played by William Redfield.
William Henry Redfield was born in Manhattan on January 26, 1927. He was the son of conductor-arranger Henry Redfield and his Ziegfeld Follies chorus girl wife, Meretta George. Billy Redfield made his stage debut in 1936 when, at the age of 9, he appeared in Swing Your Lady. Soon afterward he did some radio work and then he appeared in the 1939 film Back Door to Heaven. He was an infantryman in World War II. On television, Redfield starred in the 1953 Dumont series Jimmy Hughes' Rookie Cop. He's probably best remembered for his portrayal of Harding, a mental patient in the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was during filming of Cuckoo's Nest that a doctor on set recognized his leukemia symptoms and gave him 18 months to live. The prediction was quite accurate and William Redfield died of leukemia at the age of 49 on August 17, 1976.
Duval maps their plan of attack while Colonel Reed puffs away on a cigar. The general's got one too. I remember when people smoked in meetings. With my allergies, I'd always get sick and have to call off work the next day. They'll go into the carotid artery, go straight to the clot, dissolve it with a laser, and head back down a vein to the base of the neck for removal. The nuclear power system of the sub will make them easy to track. They'll have to be quick. After 60 minutes, they'll start to grow, and the man's immune system will begin to attack them. In the Command and Observation Center, Colonel Reed checks in with several technicians via video monitors. He's concerned about the patient's vital signs. If you blink here, you might miss Star Trek's James Doohan in an uncredited appearance as the hypothermia technician. The crew climbs aboard the sub. Captain Owens ushers Dr. Michaels to his navigation chart table. He moves on to Grant and his wireless station. It's not mentioned in the film, but there's scientific reasoning behind using Morse code transmissions. Once shrunken, the sub's antenna would be far too short to be reliable for voice communications. Grant helps Owens install an atomic fuel granule. It's the only thing that won't shrink. Grant sends a message.
Yes, message from the Proteus, sir. Miss Peterson has smiled.
Well, that's an auspicious sign. Confirm receiving.
If you know Morse code, which I never learned, I'm told that the Morse signals match the scripted dialogue. We get some exposition about how they'll use the charts to navigate inside the human body. Owens explains it to Michaels, showing him the controls. With their messages sent, Grant takes some time to go aft and flirt with Miss Peterson while she's assembling and testing the laser rifle. She gives him a stern warning about where to keep his hands. Ouch! I read that it was actually Raquel who was coming on to Stephen Boyd when the cameras weren't rolling. On screen, she confesses her undying devotion to Dr. Duval, however. They're interrupted by a wireless signal telling them to prepare to be miniaturized. Dr. Michaels says he has to check something, and he heads aft. The others fold out their seats to prep for the shrinking procedure. Grant signals back that the Proteus is ready. The film sequence of miniaturization was rather long and drawn out. Did they need to use so many extras? In Phase 1, the submarine is reduced in size to a length of about 3 inches. There were 2 of these 3-inch submarines produced. Someone had left one of the models near an open window, and a crow grabbed it, carrying it off. Phase 2 begins with a special lift brought in to move the sub. But first, a man has to look inside the sub to make sure they're all right. It reminds me of Irwin Allen's Land of the Giants. From the faces the actors are making, I think they found it about as hokey as I did. They make a big deal of raising and lowering this honeycomb-shaped platform that they call the Zero Module.
Lower zero module.
Lower zero module.
Elevate zero module.
Elevate zero module.
The module lifts a large barrel that has the markings of a syringe. The sub is carefully placed in the barrel full of liquid. Two of the men in the sub open the induction valves to flood the ballast tank so they can submerge. At this point, Dr. Michaels has a panic attack and tries to open the hatch. Wouldn't he realize that he'd flood the sub and they'd all die? I guess people do crazy things when they're under a lot of pressure. He claims claustrophobia from a childhood incident. In Phase 3, the barrel containing the sub is shrunken one final time. The 60-minute clock starts counting down. Now that they're at full reduction, that atomic particle is able to provide power to the Proteus. Phase 4 begins. A plunger is inserted in the barrel's top opening, and a hypodermic needle is attached at the bottom. The submarine's crew encounters a bit of turbulence as the syringe is moved to the patient. It's said that audiences laughed out loud when these small gyrating tracking antennas were brought in. It is pretty silly. Captain Owens puts the Proteus into a deep dive as the syringe plunger is depressed, pushing the sub into the patient's carotid artery. Red blood cells abruptly surround the sub. Dr. Duval makes one of several references to inner space. In 1987, Inner Space would be used as the title of a Dennis Quaid Martin Short comedy about a miniaturized test pilot who's accidentally injected into a store clerk's body. The Proteus is underway and heading toward the brain. When they see something unusual, Dr. Duval wants to stop and investigate. Are you kidding? On a vital mission with a strict time limit? This guy wants to go sightseeing. They encounter a strong current that pushes them off course and into a whirlpool. The effect they show reminds me of riding the rotor at a carnival. They're encountering heavy G-forces, but it doesn't stop Grant from staring at Cora's chest. They break through some sort of tissue wall, and suddenly the red blood cells are gone, replaced by blue corpuscles. Meanwhile, in the ops center, they get word that the Proteus is off course.
Proteus off course.
They've crossed over into the jugular vein. That can't be.
They went through an AV, an arteriovenous fistula, an irregular connection of an artery with a vein. Matthews suggests that it must have happened when Bennis was injured. They can't go back against that strong whirlpool current, and it would be far worse going through the heart, so Matthews calls to abort the mission. That's also the consensus at the command center. The general lights a cigar to think. He wants to know how long they can stop the man's heart. The colonel says 60 seconds. After a few quick calculations, the general says they could make it through the heart in 57 seconds. That's cutting it awfully close, but they're going to chance it. As the Proteus approaches the right atrium and the tricuspid valve, doctors stand by to arrest the heart. It's a good thing the heart stopped with the valve wide open. The Proteus sails right through. Everyone seems on edge as they navigate the right ventricle. Dr. Matthews says the semi-lunar valve should be on the left at any second. Since they're in the right side of the heart, that valve would lead to the pulmonary artery. They'll have to hurry so they're out in time. They brace for the expected surge when the heart starts back up. Duval is skeptical that it will start, though. It takes a few tries, but the heart does start, just as the Proteus clears the pulmonary valve. It should be clear sailing from here, though. They head to the narrow capillaries near the lungs, where blood corpuscles trade carbon dioxide for oxygen. As the two doctors debate the theories of evolution versus divine creation, an alarm begins to sound. They're losing air pressure in the ballast tanks. It's a good thing there's plenty of air on the other side of that thin lung tissue. As Grant goes aft to prepare for the snorkel operation, he notices that the laser rifle has broken free. Cora swears that she had fastened it down securely. Someone must have tampered with it. Grant was watching Duval like a hawk, so he couldn't have done it, could he? When the men leave, the camera stays with Raquel Welch as she teases us by unzipping her jumpsuit, only to expose a similar wetsuit underneath. If that director had had any guts, he would have put her in a bikini. Back at the command center, they noticed that the Proteus had stopped. Now, I'm not a coffee drinker, but I've never seen anyone pour sugar in a coffee cup the way the General does in this scene. I'm amazed there's any room left for the coffee. Grant decides to ignore the wireless.
Shouldn't you answer that?
Not now, we need air now.
I'm not sure if that's a good idea, but hey, I'm not writing this stuff. Grant and Dr. Michaels go through the escape hatch airlock first, followed by Cora and Dr. Duval. For the swimming scenes, when they're outside of the sub, they are being supported by wires on a soundstage. The film was shot at a high speed to give it that underwater feel when it was played back at normal speed. When Grant thrusts the snorkel into the lung, he's flung backwards. He decides to actually climb in for another try. Dr. Duval hooks a tether to the sub as a precaution. Between breaths, Grant climbs into the lung. He stands firm with the snorkel while the patient inhales, letting go of the snorkel when Captain Owens indicates that the air tank is full. Grant is thrown back and he lands inside an air sac. When the patient exhales, Grant is flung upward and his tether line snaps. After the air settles, he makes a run for it, and his companions pull him back through the lung tissue. They're back underway, and Cora examines the laser rifle. With a smashed transistor and a broken trigger wire, there's no way to fire the laser. Grant says he could salvage the necessary parts from his wireless. Dr. Michaels doesn't like that idea. Scavenging parts from the wireless unit will leave them without any means of communication. Grant says that they'll still be able to track them, though, and he sends one final message.
Message from the Proteus, sir.
Cannibalizing wireless to repair laser. The what? This is our last message. Incommunicado. Well, they really are. Well, we can track them, but that's all we can do.
While Dr. Duval gets to work repairing the laser, Grant confides in Dr. Michaels that someone has tried to sabotage the mission twice. That's a strong accusation. Next, it's on through the lymphatic system, where they start to pick up reticular fibers. They witness antibodies attacking bacteria. The antibodies' effect was accomplished by starting with the pieces attached to the object. Then they were pulled away using a wire, and they ran the film in reverse. Even with the grainy low resolution of my VHS tape, I was able to notice some of the wires. The two doctors disagree on whether another route would be more suitable. Dr. Duval says they could go through the inner ear, but Dr. Michaels points out the danger.
You see, once in the ear, any noise at all in the operating theatre would be disastrous. At our reduced size, any vibrations inside the ear would have a shattering effect.
When the tracking equipment shows the sub veering for the inner ear, Colonel Reed calls for complete silence. The engines overheat. They have to stop. Grant goes out for another swim to clear the reticular fibers from the intakes. Dr. Duval stays behind to repair the laser when Dr. Matthews and Cora decide to go out and help Grant. They're all pulling stuff that looks kind of like fiberglass insulation out of those vents. Control notices that the sub has stopped. The General pours another cup of coffee. I guess he picked the wrong week to give up caffeine. Removing the fibers seems to be working. The engine temperature starts to drop, but it's still too hot. Speaking of heat, one of the doctors in the surgical theater is twitching from the sweat on his forehead. A nurse notices and reaches for a towel to wipe the doctor's brow. In doing so, she accidentally knocks over a pair of surgical scissors onto the floor. That sound concussion from one single metal clang sends everyone in the inner ear flying around out of control. Can you imagine if she'd knocked over the entire tray? Wow. Cora gets caught in some hair-like sensors. Dr. Michaels says that she's damaging the fibers and that antibodies will attack at any moment. The men swim toward her, but Dr. Michaels says he can't continue. He goes back. Grant pushes on to reach Cora. Once he frees her, the two swim toward the sub. The antibodies are coming at them from every direction. Cora is panicking, desperately yelling for Grant to open the hatch.
Open it! Open it when I get here!
I can't do the hatches, Mother.
The antibodies start forming around Cora. Oddly, they don't attack Grant. How are they able to differentiate? The hatch finally opens, and Grant pushes Cora into the escape hatch. The men pull her out of the escape hatch airlock and onto the deck, where all of them desperately grasp at the antibodies. As straightforward as it seems, this scene needed several takes to get everything right. Take 1. They weren't given much direction other than to grasp the antibodies. Well, with the actors being gentlemen, they were all avoiding certain areas of Raquel's anatomy. Thus, there were too many antibodies remaining at the end of the scene. Take 2. After being directed to remove all of the antibodies wherever they were, everyone went right for Raquel's naughty bits all at once. Well, that certainly wouldn't do. Take 3. After a lengthy discussion of who would grasp at what pieces of antibody in what order, a final, well-choreographed shot was obtained. After a certain amount of time exposed to air, the antibodies begin to crystallize and flake off. Meanwhile, back in the operating theater, that doctor is still sweating profusely. The General pours yet another cup of coffee.
All the time to run out of sugar.
They're out of the ear. There's disagreement between the doctors aboard Proteus. Michaels wants to test the laser rifle, but Duval says that testing it now could weaken it before they need to use it. When Captain Owens points out what's ahead of them and Dr. Michaels turns to look, it dawned on me that it was a rather poor planning to place the navigation chart facing aft. They're at the blood clot. Dr. Duval and Cora start to put their gear on, and Dr. Michaels suddenly starts complaining that there's not enough time left. He tells the captain to head to the removal point. Now, why come all this way simply to take a look and then go home? I say finish the mission. Michaels says that if they exceed the 60-minute limit, they'll start to grow, and white corpuscles will attack. Michaels repeats his order to head to the removal point. Grant shuts down the power to the propulsion unit and tells Dr. Duval to get the laser. Cora and Duval go through the escape hatch. After a brief discussion with Michaels, Grant joins the other divers. In Dr. Duval's hands, the laser does quick work clearing that obstruction. Meanwhile, in the Proteus, Dr. Michaels tells Captain Owens there's a leak. When Owens comes to take a look, Michaels hits him over the head. Dr. Michaels energizes the engines and takes the pilot seat of the Proteus. Using the controls that Owens had shown him earlier, Michaels starts driving the sub. Dr. Duval and Cora are surprised to see the sub heading for a nerve, but Grant understands what's happening. He grabs the laser and he fires at the sub, disabling it. Grant inquires about the quickest way out. Remember, they only have a few minutes left, but Dr. Duval wants to save the others. White corpuscles are already starting to attack the sub. When Grant enters the sub, Owens tells him that Michaels went berserk. Grant climbs up to the pilot seat where he finds Dr. Michaels trapped. The white corpuscles envelop the glass dome and then they attack Michaels. Grant and Owens are forced to evacuate. Dr. Duval suggests that they can get out at the corner of the eye. Their 60 minutes are up. Colonel Reed orders the removal of the Proteus. The surgeons prep for surgical removal. Meanwhile, General Sugar Rush Carter has an idea. What if they're only picking up a trace of the radioactive particle? If the crew had to abandon ship, how would they try to get out?
Along the optic nerve to the eye.
Colonel Reed sets up a magnifying glass. He sees them foundering in the fluid at the corner of Bennis's eye. This next scene makes me cringe every time I see it. Reed places a glass slide next to the eye to pick up the miniature survivors. He walks quickly to another room and, with a close-up of his hand, he places the slide on a tile floor that doesn't seem to match the honeycomb pattern of the wide shot. As the four begin to revert to their original size, the glass slide seems to grow with them at first. Anyway, they grow back to normal size, and everyone in the building seems to abandon his or her post to greet them. The Fantastic Voyage was, dare I say, fantastic? It was quite enjoyable, as usual. I think I got a lot more out of it this time, looking up all the medical terms that Dr. Michaels was muttering. There was only one that I really couldn't decipher, when he said where Cora was stuck when they were in the inner ear. A few things crossed my mind while watching it this time. Did Dr. Michaels actually have a panic attack, or was that just one more sabotage attempt? His behavior throughout the film seemed hinky, and it's even more so with subsequent viewings. And to think, they thought Dr. Duval was a security risk. There have been several attempts to remake this film, but so far no one has succeeded. I think it holds up well for the 1960s practical effects and a budget of just over $5 million. But think of what they could do today with CGI. Finally, I want to address a question I have. When they were about to surgically remove the Proteus as time ran out, assuming that the blood clot was at the point where surgery wasn't an option, and the Proteus was at the location of that same blood clot, how were they going to get to the sub and the crew without killing Bennis? Or, were they willing to sacrifice the man's life to rescue the crew? It seems odd after all the trouble they went through to save Bennis. I would think the crew would be expendable at that point, considering the secrets Bennis was keeping. They'd pose no danger to the patient since they'd be dissolved like Michaels and the sub were. It just seemed odd to me. What are your thoughts? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. And I'll see you next time as I try to find another film to review on my next episode of Old Joe's Reminiscence.